Right, so 12:03, I think we'll make a start. We may very well have people who join us as the first few minutes. So we have got someone from your organisation who isn't with us yet. Please do let them know we are just going to make a start now. So firstly, hello and welcome. Welcome to our Communities of Practice event with ITSMF UK. My name's Claire Byrne and I'm the Director for Member Events on the ITSMF board. Myself and some of my colleagues, and we'll do introductions in a moment, we're with you today for about an hour and a half to talk through our Communities of Practice venture that we've recently launched, tell you a little bit about the communities and also to get you interactively involved at the end of the session to talk about where you might want to come and help us out and get involved. Okay. Rosie, I'm just wondering if you've managed to hear us yet. I personally had to sort of fiddle around with my settings. So, oh, she can hear us now. Brilliant. Thanks, Rosie. Didn't want to make a start when we knew you had a problem. So we've got a presentation to take you through today, which will be made available to you after the event. We are also recording the event as well. So there'll also be a recording pushed out to people that you can have a look at and obviously share with colleagues if you're using this material as something to try and drive service management within your organisation. I'm going to take us straight into the presentation and run through, as I say, for about an hour and a half. We have got quite a tight schedule, so I will keep us to time, and myself and our colleagues might go through a lot of the material that you can then look at your own leisure. But please do put questions in the chat as we go through, if it's relevant, and we've got a Q&A session in our interactive slot at the end. So let me just pop us into slideshow mode. There we go. So is that okay for everyone? If someone can just pop me a note in the chat or give me a thumbs up on a camera, that would be wonderful. Okay, great. So launching the new Communities of Practice. As I say, I'm going to talk to you for the first sort of 10, 15 minutes around the communities before I hand over to my chairs. But before we get started, let's have a quick look at the agenda and we'll do some introductions for you so you know who it is that you're talking to. So we'll have a look at what the Communities of Practice venture is all about, where it came from, what we're hoping to achieve, and then importantly, where we'd like to get your feedback and hopefully get you involved. The chairs of our communities, Richard, Mark and Kristen, will then take you through some additional information about how the communities will be structured, what they will do, and then particularly in their specific slots, in the sort of middle of the agenda there, what each of the communities will be looking to talk about and to engage with you about. Our interactive session is that 1 till 1:15, which is where we want to take some Q&As about group membership and also where you can choose which of the communities you'd like to get involved with. So keep that in mind as we come towards that point because we'll be asking for some feedback from you. And then we'll draw the event to the close for 1:30, just talking about what happens next, okay? But as I say, the presentation and the recording will all be available to you all after the event. So a quick round of introductions. As I said at the top of the call there, myself, Claire Byrne, I sit on the UK board for Member Events, and in my day job, I'm an Assistant Director for Service Delivery, and that's within Northumbria University at Newcastle. I'm going to hand you over to Kristen now, who's just going to tell you a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Massey. I work at Content and Cloud, who are a managed service provider. And there I am a service delivery manager for one of our largest clients, a civil engineer company. Additionally, I am the ITSMF UK Community of Practice Chair for Design and Transition. Previous to this, I was for a short period the Transition Special Interest Group Chair, and then it's obviously evolved to what we are doing now. Then that's me. I'll pass you over to Mark.
Morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Burgess. I'm a service management consultant. I work for a number of organisations, so I'm currently independently contracting with them. Filled a series of roles, including time as a service strategy and architect, which is why I was interested in becoming the Community Practice Chair for Strategy and Planning. So looking forward to introducing that and discussions to follow. I'll pass over to Richard.
Richard, have we got you?
You're on mute, Richard.
As always, you know, there has to be somebody does it.
There's always one, always one.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name's Richard Oliver. I have over 20 years experience of doing ITSM and SIAM consulting. I've worked with a number of government bodies as well as private sector departments. I'm going to become the chair for management of service and look forward to seeing where we go with it, really.
Lovely. Thanks very much, everyone. So now you know who you're talking to. Let's see what it is we're going to be talking to you about. A little bit of background. If you were at the conference in November last year, you will have seen some of this information before, so apologies for that. But we do know that we have some people on our call today who weren't there, so it's important that we can just make sure everybody's in the same place. So ITSMF UK, we offer a huge range of member services, in particular our events. We have webinars, we have masterclasses, we have what have been till now face-to-face member meetups, where people of like minds can get together, they can share information, they can have presentations, or they can look at specific problems. And we've been really, really proud of the work that we've done across a really wide range of topics. At the end of every event that we do, we always take feedback, and we take that feedback really importantly and really seriously. And we've looked recently at some feedback around our special interest groups. Sorry, could I just ask people to go on mute if they're not talking, please? I can just hear some typing. Sorry, guys, thank you. Our special interest groups, which have been in operation for a number of years and have looked specifically at areas within the ITIL framework, well, we're really coming end of life, and our feedback from our members was letting us know it was time for something a bit new. Communities of practice themselves aren't new, but they are new within ITSMF UK. And so I've worked with the member events team within the ITSMF core office, as well as my chairs, who are all volunteers, and we've all worked together to say, what could we do? And we launched our communities of practice at ITSM2020 in November last year. This session is an extension from that presentation, which is really to say what the communities are. We would really value your feedback on what you think of the idea and what you think of the model. We'll talk about the content of the communities in a little bit. And it would be good to get some feedback about, are we on the right track? And then importantly, we're going to really push for volunteers to come and help join us, because communities are communities. They're not born from us. They require you to be part of that journey with us and to bring your really valuable experience to contribute to the wider community. We have 3 communities of practice that have been established: strategy and planning, design transition, and management of service. Now, we have some little sound bites there. And as I said at the beginning of the call, just keep this in mind as you hear the rest of the presentation around where you think you might be most interested. Where could we bring most usefulness to yourself and to your role and to your organisation? Because there are the 3 communities, and we understand that people might look to flex across those communities, but it would be good to have people sort of focused in one core area, when we've talked about it, just to avoid spreading people too thinly. It's as simple as that. But Richard, Kristen and Mark will talk about that in a lot more detail as we go through. You can find out more about our communities of practice on our page that's been set up on itSMF.co.uk. The link on the right-hand side there is a hyperlink that will take you through to it, but you can also go to itSMF.co.uk and find us on there as well. And that communities of practice page tells you a little bit about what we want to do. It introduces you to your chairs, and we have some little videos there which hopefully you've been able to watch in advance of our session today, which just reiterate the purpose and the message and the meaning behind our communities. So please do take a look at that page after the event. This diagram here is just to start setting the scene of how we see the communities working together. And that's both with each other, with our other member events, and also groups such as the ITSMF office team and our ITSMF board. So where's the best place to start? Let me think of this. Top left-hand corner, the ITSMF chair regular meetings. So I have a regular meeting with my volunteer chairs, and we talk about all of the events that we're going to host. We talk about topics. A lot of our conversation in the past 12 months has been around how to move our events onto a digital platform. We've traditionally carried out those events face-to-face, as I say, and that would have included the communities. But now we're in that COVID world, and so we talk a lot about how to make our events interesting, interactive, but digital. Those meetings will continue, and the community chairs are part of our volunteer group there, and so they've been working with us for some time. We'll interact from that core group of member chairs with the other ITSMF communities. So Mark and Kristen and Richard will not operate in isolation. They will be part of the core member group. They'll also work with each other. And what we're hoping is that we'll start to see events and interactions and outputs where 2 of the communities might work together on something. 3 of the communities might do a shared event. 1 of the communities might do something on its own. And we want it very much to be almost a community within a community, and to look at that collaboration and cross-pollination really of ideas and activities. The groups will then interact obviously on a regular basis with you as our community. We want to talk with you through the meetings and through the events, but also really importantly through output. We want to make sure that we have some white papers, we have some blogs. We're busy refreshing our member forum, which you can find on itsmf.co.uk, but has fallen a little bit by the wayside. And we're going to use that as a really good way of communicating with you and for you to communicate with us. We want our communities of practice to be, really key and fundamental to the way that ITSMF UK works with our member community. And we want to make sure that when it comes to the annual conference in November each year, that we've got some really good information to share with the wider service management population. Down in the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see that the community output has got some actual tangible outputs that we're going to be tracking. We have a terms of reference and a charter that the guys will talk you through later on today. We want to talk about the different frameworks. Service management has a number of frameworks, and we want to make sure they're all considered, and that our considerations are translated into output for you to use yourselves, both for you personally and within your organisations. As I say, we want to look at our blogs and our white papers and something real that you can get hold of. And what we'd really like to do with our community is to work to get information back off you that we can help you share with the wider service management group. ITSMF is about you. We facilitate that, be that through the member events, be that through our webinars and masterclasses, or be that through the new communities of practice. We want our communities to be very agile and very scalable, as you can see in the top corner there, because we want things to have more emphasis or more focus as the situation demands. And you will help us work out what that demand is. So I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to start talking us through the terms of reference for the groups.
Oh, thanks, Claire. As you will see, what we've tried to do with the communities is have a single community of practice terms of reference, followed by charter statements for each one. So I'm going to talk to you now about the terms of reference. Later on, we'll talk about the charters. So, as with any terms of reference, it needs to set the goals for what we want to accomplish within the communities. So we've set the primary objectives to have a positive environment for discussion and collaboration, promote and share information and knowledge, and include as many facets of service management as we possibly can. So as you'll notice with the strategy one, Mark's going to be talking to you about 6 or 7 different methodologies. In the management of practice one, I'll talk to you about different management strategies and such like. And so we're trying to keep it as open as possible to feed off as many skill sets as we can to make value into the communities. The delegates, we've all agreed that we need a practice chair. So that's Mark, Kristen and I at the moment. And then we will have core members of the community, which as Claire has alluded to, she wants volunteers today to say, yes, I'll be quite happy to work in that community as my main focus. However, every now and again, I might want to dip into another one. I've already indicated I want to dip into the strategy one. So I will chair the management one, but occasionally I'll dip into the strategy one. That's what everybody can do if they want to. What else have we got? We've got the way we want to engage. So we're looking at different ways of sharing the knowledge, whether it's through blogs, whether it's through the membership forums, whether it's through calls, masterclasses, whatever. And as Claire said, some of it will be individual management groups, and others will be a collaboration of 2 or 3 of the communities. One thing that I will draw attention to here, which is we've made a decision on the, I think it's probably primarily on the charters, but I'm going to bring it out here. We've said that these communities are not for where you can advertise your wares and sell. They're for sharing knowledge rather than saying, oh, I'm really good at ServiceNow, or I'm really good at Remedy, or I'm really good at selling you this tool. We don't want that sort of activity going on, and the chairs will close those conversations down. So it is very much a learning activity. The only other thing I think I need to talk about really or touch on is these responsibilities over here. Develop and maintain online knowledge and repositories. We're very keen to have the communities develop product that can then be shared across the wider ITSMF membership. As I mentioned in my, I don't know whether you watched my video or not, but as I mentioned in the video, I think we're trying to put itSMF back at the forefront of advice and guidance around itSMF, IT service management, how it operates, how it should be used, and everything else. And the key way of doing that is pooling the skill sets and developing good product that can be shared across the whole communities. Really, that's probably enough on the terms of reference. As I say, this is not fixed in stone, but it's been board approved. The charters, as you'll find out as we go, can be flexed and debated on. So there we go. Back to you, Claire.
Okay, I think we're coming to Mark at this point, who's going to talk about the responsibilities, the important stuff. Who's going to do what?
I am, yes. So we've got a series of slides. As you can tell from when we introduced the communities of practice in the conference last year, we talked through a series of things at a fairly high level. And at that point, and in the meantime, we've been continuing to evolve the next level of detail. So that's where, in terms of reference has come, in terms of looking at the detail of that, that's where these roles have come from, in terms of the key roles that we see, supporting and enabling and moving forward with the communities. And that's where the charters have come from, which we'll talk to the main points of those when it comes to covering the individual communities of practice, with myself, Richard and Kristen as the leads. So we have an executive sponsor role, very much looking to be the champion and the lead for that, representing the communities at the ITSMF UK board. That's Claire in this case, covering also the regional and other member events. That's going to talk about the support that we need from the board, making sure that if we need to sign something off or get an approval or need some support, then that's managed up there. Anything really that we need from the board and from the main ITSMF organisation, we can take there. We don't see that person and that role necessarily being part of running the communities day to day, although I'm sure Claire, knowing Claire well, will want to attend those and will be very interested in the discussions that are had, but certainly somebody who's there to support, facilitate and champion the communities and work with that. So first responsibility was around identifying chairs, which we can tick for now. I think we do see the potential that we could start other communities if we find these 3 don't cover everything that's needed, and obviously over time we're not going to have the same chair forever, so it could be that we need to manage those on in terms of handing over chair relationships, or indeed starting new communities. So in terms of that, a lot of the early work we've kicked off in terms of defining the work that's needed, the boundaries and how we're going to manage that, holding this as a kickoff session, which is great to see. And from this point on, it then becomes getting the communities together and then managing that. So that executive sponsorship is all around helping us move forward, whereas the work today has been about getting us to this point in terms of a kickoff. Okay, if we have the next slide, please. So each community will have a chair as designated and agreed by the exec sponsor. this person is very much the lead for each individual chair, so there'll be one for each community. They will have some decision-making responsibility as to what that community will cover, and will work very closely with the other community chairs. And I think Richard stressed it, and I'll continue to stress it myself, Richard and Kristen, work very closely together in terms of how we see the communities working together. We've agreed a terms of reference that works together. We've shared our charters. We've developed these slides together. It very much is the community chairs working together to help us move that forward. So I'm not going to read every last responsibility, but to give you a feel, it's around making sure that we've organised and got sessions in place to enable us to kick off and move the community forward. It's around approaching people who we think could add some value and helping them join the session. And I'm very pleased to see so many people join this. I was speaking to Mark Lillycrop before the start of the session and said, it seems like a while ago now since we were actually talking about launching this, and once you how many people we've got, delighted to see so many people join this session. So thank you all for your support. We do see the chair working with the communities to identify what the community wants to do in terms of finalising the terms of reference and agreeing the charters, around making sure that we're clear on what success looks like for that community. And there's some initial thinking that's been done. So we're not coming with a blank sheet of paper, but we're equally not coming as chairs with a finalised version. There is definitely work to be done in terms of what the success will look like, what the KPIs and critical success factors which us as service management experts will all recognise in terms of the need for those. We'll want to pull together a core group, and that's very much what this session is about. It's about getting to the next level of detail in terms of communities. It's about helping share what we see as chairs, the communities being, and then starting to get a key group together so we can run the first session, strategy and planning of design and transition and of management of service. We'll want to make sure that we've run events. We'll want to make sure that we're using a range of channels. So I think Richard's mentioned, I'll stress it, we don't want the communities to be just a meeting every couple of months. We want to start producing advice and guidance. We want to be using online spaces. We want to be using the annual conference, the member meetup events. We want to be using as many communication vehicles as possible to promote the community, to share the good practice that we've got, and not just have this as kind of a meeting that's run every couple of months and then we don't see or hear anything of it between that. And as I said, I'll stress it again, making sure that we work across the communities. Richard did say we'll make sure that the chairs may attend each other's session, but we do talk beyond just the individual community sessions. Excellent. Next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. So we will have a series of members in each community, and they will be in a series of aspects, and we've given some thought to that towards the bottom of the slide. So it kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyhow, that the community chairs are by default members of their individual community. This was originally written for my strategy and planning. You could assume that for Richard that would say management of service and so on. For the individual community core members, we will have a core group, which is a member of that central community, who will help us meet, will help us move the community forward. They'll agree the terms of reference. They'll help us turn the inputs into the outputs, and will help us work with that. We envisage having a day one group, which is very much what this session's all about in terms of lining people up and getting volunteers. And we envisage that the membership of that will change and evolve over time. So some people will get involved in one community and might want to get then and move over to another. Some people may need to drop off for various reasons, and some people may want to join. So it's not a fixed membership, but it's all about making sure that we've got people who are interested and active and passionate and can help us move the communities forward. One of the benefits of ITSMF, we very much see being able to use the output of the community sessions. So making sure that we've got information available to ITSMF members at any level, whether it be individuals like myself or enterprise or corporate members, to make sure that we've got the information that people feel they can play a part in the community, and that they can help us move it forward, but equally that they get real value from the discussions and the outputs and the work that are produced by the communities. And I think for me, that's the real measure of success around the communities, is if we as members can see the value that we're getting from the discussions and the outputs, then we've cracked it. As Richard and I have both said, we see members from other communities of practice also starting to get involved. So it could be that somebody's got a particular interest in a session. It could be that in strategy and planning, I'm talking about how you define a service strategy or moving to a new version of ITIL. That could be something where other members of other communities of practice want to join. And we do see over time, and this is something that I think we've evolved our thinking on since we launched in November. We do see us getting guests from other external organisations, could be other best practice organisations, and so on, to attend, present and contribute to communities of practice. So it could be that we're talking to a project management framework or somebody in the standards area. It could also be that we speak to the ITSMF organisations outside of ITSMF UK and look to work with them. So those are the sorts of members that we see. It certainly gives you a flavour for the fact that it's not just the chairs and a series of people that volunteer. It's a broad range, and I think particularly key is that ITSMF as a whole see the value of the communities that we've got and the output that we produce. Okay, so we'll move on to the kind of charter level information. Rather than having yet another slide with the table in, we've looked to produce these on an individual basis. So this is strategy and planning. And I gave some thought last week as to the best way of showing this, and I've kind of divided it into 4 quadrants. So what does strategy look like in my view? What are the sorts of things you could talk about? Not an exhaustive list in terms of planning. What are the sorts of frameworks we could talk about in terms of service management? And again, what are the sort of frameworks, as an example, we could talk about in terms of other frameworks? So as I mentioned in my introduction, I have written a service strategy and refreshed it and been involved in service architecture and roadmaps and so on. And I think it's an area that certainly I'd like to see more advice and guidance on, because when I was first writing a service strategy, there really wasn't much out there. We had the ITIL-v3 books at the time. They gave us some information around service portfolio and so on, but when it actually came to writing a strategy, there wasn't a huge amount. And if we look now in terms of ITIL-4, clearly we have the guiding principles, but I would say that we'd want to make sure that we align any service strategy to a business strategy to make sure that we're supporting the business and the organisation that we're working in. And that we would also have some more architectural components in terms of the building blocks. And this is where I think this part will work very closely with design and transition in Kristen's area. And equally importantly is to think about, from a service management viewpoint, the tool sets that we used, and to think about the way that's architected. So the way in which maybe a core ITSM tool, which logs incidents and has a CMDB and assets and so on, would work with an event and with the various event and monitoring tools that are out there, and how that information would flow, maybe how reports are produced, maybe how it links to other systems like an HR system. So starting to think about how that core tool set, and it's one of the few examples where service management is actually a customer of services, and starting to think about how those would work and how those tools would work. So I've seen certainly developed architectural policies and a tool set architecture, and then a roadmap for those that thinks about where we are today and how that will evolve over a 3 to 5 year period. And I think those are all key and interesting points we can talk about in terms of what strategy would look like. Clearly, you're not going to work on a strategy every day, because a strategy by its very nature is more medium and long term, but that strategy will over time need to be looked at and refreshed. And you can do that on an annual basis or every 2 or 3 years, in line with when the business strategy is updated, or you could have it determined by a particular key point. So for example, it could be that following the pandemic and the lockdown and the implications of Brexit, that you think now would be a good time to think about a service strategy as the business rethinks its strategy, maybe moving away from an office-based approach to something that's more working from home, because that will fundamentally change the way in which services are offered and consumed, and the way in which we need to support people from home rather than from an office, potentially, depending on the organisation. So when people talk about strategy, those are the sorts of things that I've got in mind. Clearly, it could be when we get the community together, there are a few other things that we think of and add, and that's all fine and great. But I just wanted to give you a flavour of what I had in mind in terms of strategy and the sorts of areas that we could start to discuss and produce some good practice on. In terms of planning, on top right, I think there is a need to think about looking at emerging industry trends, and you could have a discussion on whether that's strategy or planning, but I think there is a need to look at that, and whether that be the business that you're working in, or whether that be service management trends, or whether that be the particular technology areas that you're looking at. Certainly thinking about those and thinking about what's happening now and what's coming up in the future. When would we want to start thinking about some automation potentially in terms of self-heal from events and alerts, as an example? What's that looking like? Is it too early for us to adopt? Is it something we want to consider in the future? And starting to think about that as a strategy and a plan. Obviously, but I've written it down anyhow. Once we've defined that service strategy, we'd need to think about how that was then planned and delivered, and work that through. We would also want to think at a high level around if we were doing service continuity, what sort of approach we would take to the test plans and schedules. Do we want to do them service by service? Do we want to work towards a larger, more business resilience event? And I think many organisations have taken a good look at their business and service continuity following the pandemic and lockdown, and given some thought to what the implications of that are. The other piece, and I think it could be broader than this as well, is potentially looking at maybe an ITSM toolset assessment and plan for evaluating, and then looking to adopt those. The same could apply when we were looking to adopt or move to a new service management framework or a new version of a service management framework. And one of the things that I have in mind is maybe moving from ITIL v3 to ITIL 4, which would obviously have a number of broader and wider implications. So there are some elements there around thinking about how we would plan those sorts of moves, which I could see being part of the planning piece. I've then, with all due respect to all trademarks and ownership, both in the UK and globally, given some examples of the sorts of frameworks that I could see this community looking at. So we'd want to understand what the service management frameworks were, and obviously ITIL and the current version ITIL 4 is primarily in our mind. But we do recognise that some organisations will want to adopt other service management frameworks, either wholly, for example, Verisim or YASM or FITSIM and so on. Some will want to go for a certification, so ISO 20000, in terms of being able to produce a certification where that's required for their adoption. And some people will want to mix and match. So some people might want to take a bit from ITIL and a bit from Verisim and a bit from another framework. So I see us having a conversation around how those work together, around what organisations need. I know some will work particularly well in some industries, and some are meant for potentially smaller organisations for which a larger framework might be too much. And I think that's where I think some advice and guidance could come from ITSMF UK, because if you look at the frameworks, which I was doing for the service strategy I was writing a while ago, it's actually potentially quite difficult to think about which one you'd adopt and which one you wouldn't for some organisations. So I think there's some good practice to come from that. And equally interestingly, on the bottom right, there are a whole range of other frameworks where service management needs to work closely with them. That could be anything from TOGAF, looking at architecture and thinking about how the service architecture and the toolset architecture fits into that. That could be COBIT in terms of thinking about a risk framework and how various standards and audit elements sit, and where service management supports that. And for those of us that have worked in federated financial services organisations, then understanding that sort of risk and governance will be key to supporting service management. Could be lean, could be DevOps, could be agile, and certainly for those that have taken a good look at ITIL 4, you'll know that there's more around how ITIL and those sorts of frameworks will work together. But again, I think there's some good guidance to manage there. Same applies to the project management methodologies, and I listed a couple there, Prince2 and MSP. And again, I think that's where we're closely with Christian and the design and transition community in terms of how that works. And there will inevitably be others. So it's thinking about how those frameworks and IT service management work together and vice versa. Some will overarch, some we work with closely, for example, in terms of project management and service transition, and others we just need to be aware of because they could, as organizations start to move and adopt to them, understand how they work with us and we work with them. So that gives you a feel in kind of 4 quadrants as to what that looks like. Claire, if we can move to the second slide. Thank you. So we have got individual charter statements. Again, we've not tried to bore you with a range of things that are going to be against that. So we've made the assumption that each community will provide support for all ITSMF members, and that's a common assumption across 3 communities. We've assumed that this community, in terms of strategy and planning, focuses on providing guidance and planning considerations for IT services. So as you see, I've assumed that that's defining a service strategy, working on a service architecture, refreshing those, and then executing that service strategy via medium and long-term planning, including potentially looking at moving between service management versions, tools evaluations, and so on. And I think when we get the communities together, I'm not necessarily expecting a long discussion in the remaining time that we have here, but these are the sorts of things that we'll want to flesh to get into the next level of detail in terms of what those charters look like. Individual use of different frameworks, including ITIL and so on. You know, I've made the assumption here that ITIL v4 is the primary version, and that's where we'll focus most of our work. But we do recognise that ITIL v3 is something that many organisations are still working with, and that there is the potential to adopt service management frameworks, as I mentioned on the last slide, and then a mix and match of those where people want to use a range of good practice. So the two boxes there in Fetching Pink and Fetching Orange do talk around the fact that you may want one version or another, or you may want to blend the two. And I think it is very important, just to close here, as I mentioned on the last slide, how we get the service management frameworks and the work that we do in service management to interoperate and work well with the other frameworks like COBIT, like the project methodologies, and like the delivery mechanisms like DevOps, Lean and Agile. So that should hopefully whet your appetite. It's not something that I think sits on its own in isolation, and you'll certainly hear from Kristen and Richard how their thinking goes, and I think there are some elements of this that are going to need to work closely with them. But that'll give you a flavour for strategy and planning, and I'll pass across to Christian now to cover his equivalent on the design and transition community.
Thank you, Mark. Do you want to move on, Claire, please? Brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously in these discussions now, there is going to be a lot of similarities between communities of practice. Mark has eloquently delivered what his community is delivering, what his community represents, and what he's hoping to get out of it and have as a community. That will be replicated. There's a lot of elements that fit into design and transition of that, the use of other frameworks, the use of other methodologies. We don't want to be close knitted, and we don't want to just hone in on one element of it. We want to get the expertise. Certainly in design and transition, the aim is to get the expertise of the wider community, and then look at what we can develop, we can work on, and we can take from different areas, different industries, and different understandings. I'll start on mine with what I've put at the bottom in bold, which is it's not just service design and service transition. The term design, the term transition is of a much wider spectrum of that, and not just focusing on service, but other elements of it will allow us to have a wider understanding of the terms and how they fit and how they belong in sort of service management principles in which we use. We're going to be closing the gaps between various disciplines through transition. Again, not just transition of service, transition of roles, perhaps. The key example that I've got is that there's probably been across industry and across roles that all you guys are currently in, a massive transition in the way of working since we've been dealing with current COVID-19. So there's been a massive transition in how people have to work, how people have to operate, and sort of the difficulty and issues that may have came in that. These areas and some the items that we could potentially look at is very just things that we've up to now scoped, but again, this list isn't exhaustive. It's very much going to come from the community as to what we can delve in and sort of understand. But a big one is, where does service transition fit in with ITIL 4? It's no longer a service management practice, so sort of it still belongs within service management. We need to understand where and how it does fit in. A big talking point is user experience design versus service design, how they work together with one another, what's the differences, similarities, what issues arise from the two, complications, benefits, etc. The community is going to make use of ITIL 4, and they're going to explore how design and transition is used within the ITIL framework. obviously with it already being alluded to, we are going to look at other frameworks available, the variables that come with that, and how we can sort of collaborate, take snippets from each framework and probably combine them or use them in separate instances also. Do you want to just go to the next slide, please, Claire? So we took some snippets from the charter statement. Again, we've not gave you the full charter statement because it'd just be a dump of information and a very sort of just difficult slide to read out from. But a couple of the key things is that we want to allude to on design and transition, and things that are for discussion, is the design and transition activity within the service value chain, some key inputs and outputs. Where does it fit in ITIL service management practices? The recognizing changes in V3 and V4, and then the use of design and transition in other frameworks. Before moving on from the transition special interest group, there was scheduled a ITIL 4 in workshop where we were going to delve in and understand the how transition fits into ITIL 4. I still intend to run a similar workshop incorporating both design and transition, how that framework incorporates both of the two, but then also using it to explore other management practices and how that belongs there also. So that's just an idea and a potential forward look for one of the future workshops that I intend to deliver as part of design and transition community of practice. Then we've got the use, what I alluded to on the previous slide, comparing both user experience design and IT service design. What would be good with this is I hope to use real life examples, get some varied industry understanding, so we can see sort of the concepts and the ideas, how they come and how they're used within different areas, different organizations, what worked well, what didn't work so well. And then sort of what opportunities that may bring if anybody was hoping to use it in the future. So with design and transition, just to summarize for me, the idea is very much that we emphasize on the community element of it. The chair, as Mark's previously alluded to, is a very administrative role. We're there to get people in to understand and elaborate on what the community is, what we're trying to deliver, schedule meetings, schedule whatever we're going to do by way of producing output. But the ideas, the concepts, the work, the effort is going to come from the community itself. Again, there is going to be opportunity and in which we will work closely and collaborate with other communities, potentially work at the same time with one another or delve into some of their work that they're doing separately. That's me on design and transition. If you do have any questions specific there, by all means reach out to me privately on here or just in the chat in general, and then I'll happily pass over to Richard.
Thanks, Kristen. I'll just get us to the right slide for Richard. So I can't see the chat while I'm on, so hopefully somebody is having a look to see if there's anything comes up there, but we will talk about and take questions after Richard's slot here. Okay, so Richard, if you can just take us through the third community, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I was going to say, what shall I say? Because Mark and Kristen have said it all, but you know, that's what happens when you go last, I suppose. Yes, the management of service one. I would just like to throw it out there that I suggested management of service rather than service management, because like change management and management of change, I see service management and management of service as two separate things. So one of the things I'd like to investigate through the whole management of service community is there a difference, and what does that mean? Because as I say, if you think of change management, everyone thinks of change management as being move and put a new box in, but management of change is when the organization changes from one working practice to another. It's how you manage that change. And I see management of service being how an organization manages all of their services for the customer in a consistent way, not just individual services being managed to deliver that value to the customer. So there we go. That's what I would like to think it's all about. So with that in mind, management of practice will look at value chain and how we get a holistic view across the whole thing. We also need to look at, yes, we've all talked about ITIL4 and how that's going to work with us. There's 34 management practices in ITIL4 and 4 dimensions of service management. It's how we look at those and how they work with the business to give value across the whole business is where I see the value from this team being really in this community. And although we'll use ITIL4, there is scope to look back at ITIL3 because I think there was some good stuff in ITIL3. And there's still, as Mark and Christian have said, there are many people still using ITIL3. But with ITIL4 comes these management practices where, you know, as I've got on this slide, risk management is done in a business. It's also part of ITIL4. How does that link together? How can we just have a single process across the business? Next slide, please. So like everyone else, well, like Christian did, I cheated and just took the charter of statement bits. The assumption is that it's formed and providing support to all ITSM member levels. Mark alluded to the types of members that we have and the types of people we want. I would just like to reiterate that communities of practice are there for people to learn and grow together. So no matter what your knowledge of that area is, you can still learn or grow information. So we don't just want subject matter experts that are going to be fancy, done it all before. We also need the ones at the beginning of their journey that say, well, actually, what is service management or what is change management? I don't understand it properly, because that helps everybody grow and it brings new blood into the system. So that's where I want to reiterate. Things that we would like to discuss, I've highlighted a few here. ITIL4 and enterprise service management. Enterprise service management is bringing it across the business. The value chain part and the principles within ITIL4 go a long way to helping you move towards enterprise service management. We've also got things like, I was in the SIAM SIG and we were talking about SIAM and smart cities and the Internet of Things. What I'd like to do is bring those discussions into this forum and into this community. So how does ITIL4 support Internet of Things? How does it support smart cities? What can we do to influence or align with those type of thinkings? And everything else I think people have talked about already. So I know mine's very brief and very quick, but I think we need to leave it there really, because otherwise, you know, I'm not sure what we can talk about that's going to add value rather than getting you guys asking lots of questions.
Thanks, Richard. I think that actually highlights, though, the synergies between all three of the communities. So yeah. Thanks, because that actually worked really well. Because obviously, hopefully, what people who are listening to the conversation there can see is actually we have got that standard wrapper around the communities with the standard TOR and the charters, etc. And they then just have their different flavours, I suppose I would say. But thank you to all three of my chairs there, Mark, Richard and Kristen, because I think that's been really useful just to trying to flesh it out a little bit, isn't it? You know, what quite does this look like in practice? Because we've talked about it for so long, we need to start now doing the do, so to speak. So we have an interactive session, but just before we go into that, I'm just going to come off the share there. So I'm still on the screen share, but I wanted to just stop sharing for a sec to have a quick look at the chat. Because as I say, when you screen shares, I'm sure you all know you can never see who's asked a question. And we have got a little bit of time before we go into the interactive session to just go through some of that chat and questions. So if I just sort of throw that open as well to say if anybody's got anything that they want to note at this time, you know, please do pop it in the chat and we'll just have a quick look. I can see Mark beat me to it at the top. Thank you, Mark, as well. So we've got slides. Yes, slides will be made available afterwards. The ITSMF website is down, Duncan. I've just been on it. So if you give that another go, it's definitely there at the moment. but if there is still an issue, please do flag it. But I've just been on it because I was putting a thing on LinkedIn to say great to see everybody, and I'd linked from the page. So give that a go. Slides are available. Oh, someone else has checked it. Thank you, Richard. I should probably read down the list first. Led by members. Melanie, so Melanie's had to drop off the call, but she sent me a message saying she's interested in joining one of this communities, so I'll make a note of that and pass it through to the guys for after. Right, there's an interesting one here which Mark Lillycrop might want to have a look at. We've got, is there a link with the PSMF skills framework with the communities? The people side of service management needs to be considered and covered. And that's a note that Alan's put up, so thank you for that, Alan. Mark Lillycrop does a lot of work for us from the core ITSMF UK site on PSMF, and I'll come to him in a second for a comment, but certainly I would see that framework being linked in is the same way as all of our other frameworks. I would completely agree that the people side is key, because you don't do anything without your people, as we all know. And I think it would be really good as part of a refresh of PSMF that we're doing to bring that out through the communities and to say, does PSMF support the community work and support you as members of that community? So we have got quite a set of activities planned this year for PSMF, and this is from me now as board, where I say we want to do a refresh and a relaunch. So watch this space, so to speak. Mark L, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you've said it really, Claire. I think it's essential that as we refresh the content in the competency framework for PSMF, that we reflect what's going on in the communities of practice as well. It's kind of being done in a slightly separate area and linking back into the board separately. So I think it's a good thing to flag up at this point, because we want to make sure that those two activities are happening in unison. Yeah, I mean, thanks for making that point. It is essential, I think, that that we keep the whole skills question very much in mind as we're exploring these areas that are key to the new communities. So yeah, we'll certainly be watching that one.
I would
Thanks,
just like
Mark.
to add. I'd just like to add to that the SIAM SIG, before its demise, did start looking at PSMF against SIAM stuff. So again, we can bring that into management of service community and start expanding or looking at that more to bring it in line with the rest of the management practices.
Yeah, it's all about mapping all
Absolutely.
of these activities together, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I know Julia did a lot of work on mapping the SIAM and PSMF stuff, so we could just look at that and reevaluate it and move it on, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thanks.
so certainly a great question, Alan, and thank you. And I think if anybody isn't up to speed with PSMF, or our professional services management framework, again, go to itsmf.co.uk. There's some information there on the current framework, and we'll certainly look to bring that into the communities. I think, Richard, you said this in your conversation, that it's about having people from all parts of their journey, whether people are just starting off in service management or really experienced in service management, and PSMF can help you align there. We can certainly have a look. Claire has raised a question. There's a lot to cover in all of the areas. There is absolutely, and we have got a next step slide, Claire, that we'll talk about quite how we'll begin. We'll look to do some events to start us off, and then myself and the chairs will work with the community members to sort of say, okay, what's our roadmap going to be throughout this year? What are our focus topics going to be? How do we take that forward? How do we bring output out of there? So we have an idea, we've talked a huge amount about it, but fair to say that we'll work with you on what that then tangibly looks like. It's probably important to, at this point as well, just overlay that from an ITSMF board perspective. We are busy working out our strategy and roadmap for this year and next as well. And so there'll be some elements around that work, which also comes into the communities. And we'll look to use the communities as our direct contact with our member group as well, as our other face-to-face member events, digital at the moment, where we can say, what do you think of this? You know, we want this to be an interactive conversation across ITSMF UK activities. Using the communities is a good point.
I would also, you know, I don't know, I'm focused out for a bit, but the comment about it's such a wide area, where do you start? I see that as being very much the core members of each community advise on what they see as the key areas that we should go for first. And therefore, you know, like any elephant, one chunk at a time, but what's key to everybody? Is it, you know, service design packages? Is it business continuity? Is it CSI? What is it that is the most key thing that we should concentrate on first, and then gradually move it through the parts, really?
Yeah, I think Richard makes a great point. There is a lot to cover, and for those of you that know me or have worked with me before, I like a challenge, and this is a challenge because there is so much to cover. But I think rather than looking at all of that and going, oh, it's a lot, I look at it and go, great, okay, there's a series of things we can work on. Now, let me get a community together. Let me look at what needs to be done. I'll have some suggestions on what I think we need to start with. But actually, if the community thinks it's something else, then that's what we'll work on. And it could be help me understand how to pick a tool. It could be how do I move from ITIL v3 to ITIL v4. It could be something else, but I think we'll be very much led by what the members of that community want to manage, and whether it be working, as Richard says, on one thing at a time, or maybe identifying a top 2 or 3 that we address. We can't boil the ocean and cover them all in one go, but I think we certainly know that there are going to be some areas to start with, and we'll then start to build and evolve from there.
Great, thank you both. We've got a couple of questions there, and then we'll move to our interactive slot. So we've got an interesting question from Ethan. So it's not something, Ethan, looking at Prosky and sort of its relationship to ITIL, I suppose, that's come up so far. But that's exactly the sort of question that we would want to be brought to the communities to say, anyone used it? What do you think? What were your successes? What were your challenges? So I personally can't answer that directly today because it's not a framework I've used. I know of it, but I've never used it. But I think that's an absolutely brilliant example of the types of conversation we want to start having with these groups. I will throw it open to see, does anybody have an answer for Ethan's question while we're here? You know, we've got a few minutes.
I think Mark's slides explained it or expressed it in the best way, but it's a common theme throughout each of the community depending on where it was. The idea and the use of different frameworks within different principles, it's obviously this is the ideal sort of query and point that we want to get across and expand on and get expertise. And as you've just asked this question, there's probably someone else within the community that has the same question or has an interest or has the same issue that you may have had before you implemented a certain management, a certain practice or framework. And then we can develop on that of exactly the points that we've raised, what worked well, what didn't work so well. So in theory, there isn't anything that sort of we wouldn't want to explore and delve into. The opportunity and the way that you've brought it to the forefront, Ethan, and said, oh, I've got this as an example. That's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for within the community.
Great. So Ethan, make sure whichever community you get registered for, that gets flagged as a question as the first thing to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Ethan. I think somebody, probably you or a member of your organisation, asked a similar question at the launch session, or probably in the ITSM2020 chat channels afterwards. Yeah, I'm aware of that framework. It is not something that I work with directly, but it's one of the ones that I think we could have a good discussion around, particularly when it comes to how we align IT service management and IT change with the way business wants to manage its change. You know, and part of that sits in strategy and planning, part of that sits in design and transition, and part of that sits in management of change. So I think those are the sorts of discussions we can have.
Great, thanks guys. So we've got a couple of questions there we'll just pick up. We've got one from Satnam around our tool. And the tool has been the subject of many, many discussions. So you're absolutely right. It hasn't been covered here, but we've looked at lots. What we're opting to do at the moment, as I mentioned, is sort of that refresh of the online forum on itSMF.co.uk, because there's some other really good information there that we don't want the community to lose sight of. And that's our member community, not the COPs. But we are looking at a different type of tool. You know, so many of us do use products, as you mentioned there, sort of Slack, and myself and the chairs have had a little play around with our own Slack channel to see was that something that might work well. And we'd certainly be open to a conversation with the COPs as you all start getting yourselves established as a team, is to say what communication tool would work for you. You know, we do still want to stick with that corporate forum off the website because a lot of our other members use that. But we appreciate it needs, like I say, a bit of a tidy up, bit of a refresh. So we're going to do that first, and then we'll take some comments and feedback from you about how you would like to be interacted with, and then we can make sure the tooling matches that.
A key point to probably raise here as well, and I won't harp onto it anymore because, as Claire's alluded to, there is slides on sort of next steps, but current climate would suggest that a lot of the work that we're going to be doing initially is going to be virtual. So the tool sets and how we collaboratively work with each other and deliver content is at the forefront of each community at the moment anyway, because of the restrictions that we've currently got in place. So it's a really good point and something that is being explored.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. And Mark, thank you, Mark, who's just replied to Ingrid there, you know, who'd like to share the output. And yeah, we have got a couple of people who were on with us today who approached us in advance and said, I'm a personal member, but can I come on because I want to try and, you know, persuade my organisation to do the same. I'm personally going to use it. I'm a personal member, but I want my organisation to be more involved. And so I'm going to use the material. And yes, as Mark said, Ingrid, that's absolutely fine to do. And if there's any further material that we can offer you, you can get in touch with myself, claire.byrne@itsmf.co.uk, or Mark and Graham, and we can share details after the call for people. If it's a community question, we've got Mark and Kristen's and Richard's details alongside mine on the website on our Communities of Practice page. So what I'm going to do, without further ado, but please do keep on putting questions on, we'll come back to those, is we have a little interactive session. I've got another slide to show you, but all it says is interactive session, so I'm not going to go back to a screen share just yet. But we're very keen to try and take people down that journey of which community would you like to be part of. Now, I touched on this at the top of the call, and I'd quite like to have a few minutes on a conversation about it, where if we have three, you could be part of all three. That might take an awful lot of your time. You may find that you're spread between the events, so you can't necessarily do all of them, but that's absolutely your choice if you'd like to be part of three. You may also, as Richard alluded to, be part of one group primarily, but want to flex into the others. It may be you're not quite sure, so you'd like to register an interest in all three of the communities, and then as we get established and find out a bit more, you can say, actually, you know, design transition, that's the one for me, or management of service is the one for me. So what we'd like to do is put a quick poll out, which Mark Lillycrop is hopefully going to get working for us, where you'll be prompted to choose one or more of the three communities that you'd like to be have an interest registered for.